little ramp.
Members here, the four of us. Why don't you just give me your name, Joe, and
Joe Knapp.
Ed Desjardins?
Lou Dispenza.
Gloria Swanmont.
Okay, and the Historical Society, actually Rick is a director of, and I'm a director as well. And we've got the president of the Historical Society, Chris Kamitsky, there. And building inspector, John Mativia, is second row back. And the representative for the Camp Dennison is Jim Lacey there. And we've worked with Historical Society and Jim Lacey to see what might be done in Camp Dennison in terms of using the facility or taking it apart and rebuilding it. And we've got pluses and minuses. There's we have to look at the ins and outs of trying to for that to occur, and money is primarily the major reason, and we'll get into that a little later. The Historical Commission considered the building, which is known as the Adams Kimberly Barn Tannery, built in 1770, and Rick will go into the detail of that shortly. We've considered to be historically significant, and that's why we're all here tonight. I'll try to go over, and we'll go over these other items in due time here. We'll go over what we hope to accomplish at this hearing. As I said, I've asked Rick Detwiller, who's also a preservation architect, to present some of his graphics and some historical comments on the barn tannery that he's been involved with over the years. And he has a PowerPoint presentation, and for those, it'll be particular informative for those that haven't seen this presentation before and not familiar with the barn itself. We'll have comments from the Historical Society and the Camp Dennison, looking at the advantages and the disadvantages of trying to get them involved in that. I'm trying to keep this thing as local as possible, although we have looked at a number of other organizations contacted by both Rick and myself. We can touch on some of these a little later in the meeting. Mass Historic Commission, Chris Skelly, Essex National Heritage Commission, I think both of us have reached them there. Bill Steelman, Chief Operating Officer of the Essex Heritage. And the other person there was Annie Harris, who was the CEO, to see what assistance we might be able to get from them. Then we'll have any comments that the owners would like to add to the meeting. And then any audience comments from whomever, friends, neighbors, whoever attended this meeting. And perhaps where do we go from here? And then I'll try to summarize the hearing. And at the end of the hearing, building inspector has asked, John Mativia, has asked the Historical Commission to be required to vote to determine if the structure should be or not be preferably preserved. And from that, we will take it from there. If it is preferably preserved, the proposed demolition, I'm reading now from the demolition delay bylaw that says if the proposed demolition would be determined to be architectural, cultural, political, economic, or social heritage or resources of the town, then such building or structure shall be considered preferably preferred. So we're not quite there yet, and we'll be voting that before the meeting. So Rick, I ought to turn it over to you, and you can give folks a history of what we're looking at and what's occurred.
Thanks, Ed. I'm Rick Detwiller, and I'm a preservationist by trade, so what I do is this kind of work as a profession. You may have all heard of the Governor Shirley Eustace House in Roxbury, or the Colonel James Barrett's house in Concord. Those are two of the projects that I was the principal on. And they're kind of significant. And then my browsing through the documentation for our property at 302 Central Street that turns out to have been the Captain Benjamin Adams house, built about 1754, actually by his father Abraham Adams for him. And we know, and it's well documented after I dug through and I put this all on a form for the Mass Historical Commission a couple of years back before any of this came up, documenting the history of the place and the barn itself, which turns out to have been a historic tannery. And not only that, turns out to be, as far as I know, the oldest tannery in Massachusetts. And the case that I'm making only for preservation in some form or other is that it's a highly significant building, and I'll show you some of the reasons why I think so. And it's outlived its usefulness on its present site, and it couldn't be adapted to its owner's use, but it nevertheless is a historically important building, and I'll try to show you some of the reasons why. Here's the site. It's right along, if you look down to the left, you see Central Street, and the driveway to 304 is the shaded area, and then right below the driveway is the existing barn, which was the tannery barn, and a former shed to the east. You can see on the right is a ruin now. That's just an open rock wall with a foundation. And the rest of the barn is, believe it or not, as early as 1770. There's very good documentation for that, as well as the structure itself to help support that. And the reason it's on the brook is that there was a lot of water. They needed water for tanning pits, which were dug around it, and you'll see some of that later. The other reason the tanning went so big in Georgetown, and it was the beginning of Georgetown, and the reason Georgetown got built was a lot of tanneries and shoemakers were funding all of this construction that was done by Joseph Kimball in the 1830s all along Elm Street, and all of that street's been recently documented. But Colonel John Kimball, who was the later owner of the house and the tannery, was tanning hides there. In 1825, he tanned 4,000 hides from South America, believe it or not. So they weren't for local use. Apparently, they were shipping this stuff out around. And here's along Battle Road. This is a interpretive sign that's on Battle Road in Lincoln, actually, next to, it's Minuteman Park. It's part of Minuteman National Historical Park. And the good thing about that is that they happen to have a tannery site that they haven't developed or anything. There's nothing left above ground. But they have a great graphic that shows you how they use the tan pits dug in the ground to tan the hides. And notice that they're holding the long 10-foot poles. And you know that expression, you wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole? Well, it might have generated from this profession or trade, which was reaching in to stir the hides around, and in the middle of what was basically sort of a kind of a septic mix of chemicals, not really nasty stuff, but organic things that leach into the ground and are gone by now 100 years later or 150 years later. But what's important about that is just the setup and the poles, and keep that in mind when I show you the rest. Now, there are no tanneries that are this old that I could compare to this one. So I found in England an 18th century tannery that's just the site, also another archaeological site. Well, they dug it all up and they've identified every little feature of it. And there are tan bark piles, there are lime piles. They use the lime to get the hair off these things. Anyhow, this is the kind of subsurface feature that's underground around the existing barn, and obviously wouldn't go with it. But what's interesting is the oldest tannery that I could find that's documented is the Hancock Shaker Village Tannery. It's 1820 to 1835. But what's in it is very interesting too. You can see that it's a sort of a similar type of building on the left up there. But they had a forge in there and a shop. They did a lot of woodworking. They had to do a lot of tool making to go with the tanning. And on the right, you can see there's a huge press that they call the cider press. And there are the remains of a similar press in the Adams Kimball barn. It's standing up on edge. The platform you see at the bottom is on edge. And all those uprights and cross pieces are lying in a pile on the floor, and you'll see some of that later. This is the oldest photo we have showing the Tannery barn on the right and our house up there, which is the Adams Kimball house. So he would walk down the hill to get to the brook, basically, where he did all his hide tanning. But it was the reason he could afford a gentleman's house on the hill at the entrance to Georgetown, which was
Lou
South
Skyrick's house
Georgetown.
prior to you?
That was Lou Skyrick's house.
Yep.
And then the elm trees are another 18th century feature that hung on into these pictures. If you look very closely by the corner of the house, you'll see a 500-year-old oak that had all been coppiced, and it's got a lot of branches, but it's got a trunk that's over 6 feet in diameter.
Wow.
And I've got other pictures of that, but that's how old the site is. You'll see more of that later. At any rate, here are the photos of the exterior, and the front had the big barn on the south side opening onto the creek where they did all of the tanning and had the pits. And there's an end entrance here on the left, top left, you can see. And in the back, on the lower left, you can see there were two little loading doors on the back side where you loaded in the hides and the tan bark and all the stuff you wanted to keep dry and store on the second floor. So it was a multi-level operation.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just, at this point, talk for just a second. We had talked to the owner about possibly using or incorporating this, but he needed something much larger to incorporate your requirements.
Yeah, the internal structure is not alterable.
It's only
to
30
be
by 30.
high enough or
Yeah.
long enough without, basically taking away the interior, and by then you don't have any structure holding up the
Yeah,
roof.
exactly.
So that's the reason for that. But anyway, this is the way the building functioned. You loaded it from the back, half level up. They had wagons backing up to it. We found evidence of some little rails. They might have had little carts that led up to some of these things. At any rate, there was a little chimney and a forge probably on the end, at the west end next to the door. But now on the interior, you can see some interesting things, that it's not a barn and it is 18th century. Here you see the purlins of the roof. They were horizontal going this way instead of this way. None of these things meet code today, obviously, but they hold up for 250 years, better than a lot of buildings. When we had people doing remediation at our house, they said the newer buildings are in worse shape when they get soggy than these old ones. Anyway, this one is aired and it's dried out a lot. There's a few rotted members that we know need replacement. There are the loading doors in the back on the second floor level. And then down below, the structure is all big, 4x6 joists or whatever. But these long poles that you see, these wavy poles down on the lower right and the ceiling, and on the end there are little handles that look like oars. Those are the 10-foot poles that they use to stir the hides. So this is like tannery material. Up above, you can see the heavy timber braced frame, and Lou Skyrick did a lot of work on this building trying to preserve it. He did a lot of exterior sheathing. He replaced the bottom of the post on the left, and on the right you can see it's looking two different directions at the back of the building. But a lot of the structure has been repaired over the years, but it's essentially in its original form. And in the lower left you can see that the back wall, the foundation wall, is a half level higher than the front, so that it goes into the side of the hill so they can load things into the back. And on the right is this amazing stair that's from a waney edge of a board. It's obviously not quite the code, but it's fascinating and it's worth documenting at least. At any rate, the building was built like a mill. Do you see all the corner braces in the corner, the wind braces? It was built like a mill structure to resist vibration of machinery running and things like that, much more so than a barn. And inside, you can see on the upper right, you can see two little hatch marks. Those are Roman numerals for the matching of the two joints. So it's all put together with the Roman numerals the way an 18th century building is. I kind of gave that up around 1800. And then in the back, again, those diagonal corner braces or wind braces. And then below on the left is the base of some machine. Until somebody studies this stuff, nobody knows exactly what they were for. I found out recently that there's the Peabody Leather Workers Museum, and they may not be that active, but it's an Essex National Heritage Visitor Center in the George Peabody House in Peabody. So there are people interested in preserving the history of the leatherworking and the shoe industry.
Yeah, let me.
The Lynn Museum as well.
Let me just mention one other thing that I think might be relevant here, Rick.
Yeah.
We had Aaron Sturgis, who happens to be an expert in reconstructing these barns.
Well, he does take them apart and put them together.
Then puts them back together, and each of them has a chalk mark, and he takes it apart piece by piece. And many of these pieces that Rick is pointing out would be like an erector set, or so the thing would come together.
Out and the tenon joints are usually
exactly.
Tenon joints are usually, hopefully salvageable.
If they were to be relocated, then he's got a set of documents that he can go by and everything described.
And I had a barn once from New Hampshire that my brother rebuilt. The first time I saw it, it was a pile of timbers in his yard. He had photos of it after it fell down in New Hampshire. But I was able to reconstruct it from the Roman numerals because I found all the joints and where they went together. So it was like doing a jigsaw puzzle, but that can be done. It's done all the time.
Yeah.
We moved Isabella Stewart Gardner's coach house from Brookline to Roxbury, where it's got the coach that Governor Eustis took Lafayette around Massachusetts in 1825.
The one in Rowley, for instance, Aaron Sturgis reconstructed that. And that was from Derry, New Hampshire, and that was built in 1775. But he carefully, again, took the thing apart, identified all the parts and pieces, and then built it on our Rowley site for the Rowley Historical Society.
He also did the barn at the Capon House in Topsfield. He moved that barn, which is very early.
He's got a crew of like 12 people, so he certainly has a large enough staff to do it if
and he's from
necessary.
Maine. Yeah. Down in the lower right, remember that big press I showed you in the Shaker Museum? That's all the timbers for a press. And then what looks like more vertical planking against the wall, that's the base of the platform. It's like 2-inch thick plank, all bound together, and it's standing up and chained up there. So it's part of the equipment that was in the tannery, and not many people would realize that. I wouldn't have known it until I started digging into how these things were used and what they were made from. Anyway, here we have a workbench on the left up on the second floor, and on the right some more of the equipment that's got basically the bases. The one in the back is blue on the right. There's a blue painted bench that seems to be a lathe for turning things. And a lot of them are very early. They're at least 19th century. And on the lower, you see the two plans that I've done so far. They're just schematic at this point. But on the bottom left, you can see the floor plan, and on the right of the floor plan, you can see where the timbers are lined up. I actually measured and drew some of them so I could sort of figure out what that was there. And the platform standing on edge there, you can see the vertical lines between the planks.
The stone wall here that Rick pointed out earlier would probably require a piece of structure that would support that, or
you either extend it or you build it into an embankment, which is an easy thing to do too, and keep the siding similar to what it was. At any rate, it's all very unusual framing. Aaron said there's a couple of different trusses that were meant to span the first floor somehow. So some of the first floor posts have been inserted or moved around later. And they added in a little mezzanine that's up at the midpoint of the second floor over the middle bay, and that is superfluous. That was just added in much later. At any rate, that's the story. And then lying on the floor by that machine is some kind of a leather belt to run machinery. So there's a lot of like mill machinery in the thing. They either had a steam engine or they might have even somehow used water power at some point. Now, the guy who owned it was Captain Benjamin Adams. Well, we happen to have at the Historical Society Ben Adams Musket from the Revolution. It's probably one of the ones that put the bullet holes in the sign, Brocklebank has the General Wolfe on his horse with the bullet holes through it. You can visit that and see it up in the areaway. But his company was the Western Rowley Company, and he was captain of the militia company during the Revolution. And they shot those holes supposedly on the day they went to Lexington and conquered. And on the right, you see his desk in the Historical Society collection, and below that, his grave that's in Union Cemetery with his veteran's marker. So he was the captain of the militia company. He died in 1821, I believe. And on the top left is the Neville Point, which I found in my yard, which is, according to our former Historical Society member, who was an archaeologist for the state, is a Neville Point. It dates to 6,000 to 8,000 years old, which makes it 4,000 to 6,000 BC. So they've been living here since before the pyramids. So that's what happened along the brook, even before the Tannery. So that's basically the story, and I just thought you'd all like to know what is the reason we're bothering to do all this. Also, here you see the original view from Dan Meter up along Central Street with a little rickety rail along the brook there, and then the drive to the right leading down to the Tannery. But obviously everything else obscured by the foliage. So that's the story, and the main pitch that I have is that this tannery is old enough to have supplied leather to the shoemakers in Lynn and Peabody, and it turns out that Peabody and Lynn were making shoes during the Revolution. Lynn supposedly produced about 50,000 shoes for the Continental Army, and they were shipped down the coast, and they got to them. They talk about the bloody feet at Valley Forge. Well, they managed to find suppliers for the shoes, and a lot of them came from New England. And that's a pretty well documented fact. Needs a little more research, but it's possible some of this stuff found its way down the coast from Georgetown. The shoemaking and leather manufacturing center.
My pitch is a little different than Rick.
Yeah.
Rick goes way back, even beyond me. What I've looked up is that George Washington himself hadn't even been elected president when this barn was standing.
He was still ahead of the Army.
Yes, he was ahead of the Army. He served 2 terms in 1789. 1732 to 1799 is when he died. So it's been around longer than our
Well,
president.
when this was built, the revolution hadn't started yet.
That's correct.
So these guys started the revolution, and then they had to supply it. And he was at the Battle of Saratoga and got his hat shot off or something and captured a gun. But that's the story of Captain Benjamin Adams. And that's why I think it would be nice to have the tannery along with the rest of his stuff, if we can.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
even at the Historical Society,
Okay.
which had a barn and no longer does.
I was going to touch briefly with Chris Kaminsky and the Historical Society, and then talk again. Camp Dennison seemed to have the same problems of how to go about it. What are the advantages and disadvantages? And
Funding is the main disadvantage.
funding, that's right.
Because I've seen impossible things done with the proper funding.
I'm more concerned about if we had a fundraising event and had a professional in raising funds, if we came up with 10,000, 15,000, whatever the number might be, 20,000, and would have enough to dismantle it and store it in a trailer of sorts, storage
It would
trailer.
take about 25,000 according to
Yeah,
Aaron Sturgis
that's
to
correct.
take it apart and store it in a.
But then the next step would be 50 to 75,000 to
Yeah.
all reassemble it. You'd need a foundation wall around
You need a
it.
grant, you need a CPC grant or something like that.
You need deep pockets basically to
You
get the
need
thing done.
big funding.
And
And you gotta think big or else it doesn't
Yeah.
get done. At
Now-
the Shirley Eustace House, it was condemned by the Boston Building Inspector in 1919. It took them 90 years, and the place just hosted the Hermione, which was Lafayette's ship came in, and Lafayette's descendant, who's also named Lafayette, who we know, came to the house and got to see the bed he slept in New Hampshire. the real Lafayette.
Yeah.
We got a bed from New Hampshire, but the point being that with patience and a little money and time, you can actually do
Well,
almost anything.
let
if you
me
decide.
take 5 minutes here, Rick, and go over the situation with the Historical Society in
Yeah.
Camp Dennison and the issues that they had. I was hoping early that maybe, we know that there was a barn at the Historical Society. What if this might be dismantled and left on the site? What we don't want is years later, after it's dismantled, finding a storage compartment there and
I'm in favor
and
of
for
a
years-
one-step thing where you just do it all. Because
it's gotta be done
if it goes in a
completely.
container, the Minuteman National Park has a house, a little gambrel roofed house that was taken down 10 years ago on Balls Hill Road
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Concord. And it's still sitting in a trailer somewhere and it's probably rotted to pieces. So it's kind of like all or nothing, I think. I mean, you put it in a trailer, fine, if you've got some people with leads on how they're gonna do it.
Yeah,
But I'm in favor of thinking big.
yeah, well, let's hold off for a second until I talk to Jim Lacy, who they've discussed. Oh, Chris, why don't you comment on what the thoughts are on the Historical Society?
Well, the best way to get the funding would be through CPA,
Yeah,
but the problem with that is it wouldn't be approved until town meeting in May, which would be, even if you put a 6-month demolition delay on, it's beyond that. And even if we got the money, we would have to still go through Conservation Commission because our property is right on the Pembroke.
yeah. There's wetlands right next to the.
Yeah,
Chris,
so there would be, there'd be wetland issues there. And also the problem of storage, we just don't have that much cleared land, and again, we have the issue, I don't know if Concom might have a problem even with us storing
Yeah.
something like that.
But funding is the major issue,
Yeah.
though. You know,
And
there simply
we-
isn't. We're not a
GHS
wealthy.
definitely does not have the funds to do anything
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Even when we try to do fundraising, we just
Yeah.
have trouble bringing in a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Basically, what we bring in right now is just about enough to pay the bills on the museum.
Yeah.
So, I don't see how we could possibly afford to do this without some sort of grant, or like I say, CPA would be too far down the road. And I imagine Camden, in terms of CPA, is gonna have the same problem, although they do have more room to store something.
Yeah, Jim Lacy has the same sort of issues, but I guess you had
Can I
asked
ask
before.
a quick question of Chris?
Mhm.
I think you just sent us some research on the Brocklebank property, and am I mistaken, or was that once, that they had a tannery once on the property?
Well,
I think
it was a bigger property at
Yeah.
that time,
and it's the same brook further down. Penn
further down
Brook.
the brook, yeah, it would be, I'm not sure, I think it was.
Somewhere on the property
It was
there
beyond
was
what
one.
is now our property.
Yeah.
It was not,
But somewhere on that property at the
along
time, there
that
was
stretch,
a
somewhere between
tannery.
Pembroke Ave
Yeah,
and Pillsbury.
When it was
I
a
would say.
bigger
That was
property,
much
yeah.
bigger property, but yes, there was a tannery.
We're not gonna go back and make a tannery out of
I'm
it,
not trying to
Rick.
make you make a tannery, I'm just
Yeah.
interested to
Yeah.
know that there was another
Yeah.
tannery
Yes,
there.
there was a tannery
On
on
property.
what was.
Yeah, I'd like to
larger
get
property
Jim
in those
to
days.
comment on what your thoughts are, Jim, as far as,
Well, our problem
Camp
is
Dennison.
where do you put it at Camp Dennison? We, certainly putting it down on the water is something that we would absolutely not support.
Yeah.
That waterfront to us is an asset.
Yeah.
We have weddings there, people take pictures there, people camp there. The only other open space is where we park cars in big events. So we have really no open space for a building that big. And then you run into, if you put a building on Camp Dennison, who's responsible for it? Is it the people in Camp Dennison? Is it
That's right.
the Historical Commission? And how do you take care of conflicts? My feeling is that if you ever wanted to do this, it's way too late, because it would require just a lot of planning and discussion. Just putting it, just for instance, putting it on the water in Camp Dennison again, which we
Yeah.
would support, would require getting permission from both Boxford and Georgetown,
yeah,
because the waterfront, the water touches Boxford.
Can I ask
So
you a
it's-
question?
yeah.
My question was,
Can you hold off just a second, Rick, before you ask the question? I want to finish some of these notes that I can ask him specifically, and then if there's a question, you can insert it then. Camp Dennison, years ago, apparently the it was given to them as a self-help grant, from what I understood. Then you need to contact the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs and get them involved if you wanted to do something down there, create another building.
Heck, I
You
haven't,
need
I
for
haven't
written
researched that, I don't know, that's what you said, and I didn't.
Yeah, this is what I was told by conservation folks.
Yeah, yeah.
You need written permission if you want to include
Okay.
another building on the site.
Yep.
If that is the case, then I think we're looking at something that's gonna take months down the road before something like that could even occur, or you get the permission you need, probably at the state level, I would imagine.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
My one question is, not putting it on the water line, which is obviously out of the realm of possibility environmentally, but the road where the canoe access is has an embankment and it goes up substantially above the water and comes maybe 200 feet back. And anywhere along that drive was where I pictured that you might be able to do that, but that was my picture of why I suggested it.
Again, you know, without looking at all of that and dealing with the conservation commissions and, you know,
Yeah, it's
again,
too much work.
I think
We
it's too
decided
late.
Yeah.
months ago
Yeah.
when we
It's too
suggested the idea that nobody had the time or energy to do the work.
Well, fortunately, the owner has been able to work on the second building. It's under construction
Yeah.
now, so we're not hampering that from,
Right.
you know, at this point. So I think that's a plus. Let's see, historic other organizations we may want to touch on just briefly, Rick, that either you've
Yeah.
contacted or I've contacted.
Essex National Heritage would be first.
Yeah, yeah, that's one that I think both of us have spoken to them about. Sturbridge Village, I think you had mentioned you had sent something to them, you had not received anything in terms of a reply. Mass Historic Commission, Chris Skelly, he's aware of it, we've spoken to him. Aaron Sturgis certainly knows the business, and I think you had mentioned to him if he knows of anyone else that would appreciate it or could use it, I think there would be a big plus. But again, he hasn't stepped forward, so we're kind of spinning our wheels here at this point. Now, I don't know if the owner has anyone that you've contacted or know of anyone that might be.
When you finish, I have a
Okay.
full presentation.
Aaron's, okay, the owner's comments I had next added, so if you wanna
Okay.
comment now.
Maybe we can turn on the lights so we can.
Sure.
I'll be ready to-
The switch up, yeah,
Yeah.
on the back wall. Pull it. There you go. I think I'm just guessing now, that we've pretty much all done our homework, and historically, I think it's very clear from Rick's presentation, historically, it's a great building. It could be or should be preserved if it's humanly possible. Financially possible, I guess, is the other word that probably is. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. DeJardin. Again, I'm Brian Cassidy. I'm Jim Mosket's attorney, and Jim, the owner of 304 Central Street. What we're here to talk about tonight is, I think none of us, we all agree on the historical significance of the building.
Yep.
Under the community preservation bylaw, this board can, we've applied for demolition permit, this board can delay that for a period of 6 months. But the regulation specifically provides that notwithstanding any other finding you may make with regard to the historical significance, that it be preferably preserved. If you're satisfied that there's no likelihood either that the owner or some other person or group is willing to purchase the property, preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the building, or the commission is satisfied that for at least 6 months, the owner has made a continuing bona fide and reasonable efforts to locate a purchaser to preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the subject building, and that such efforts have been unsuccessful, then you can't delay the demolition permit. Jim bought this property in January 31st, 2014.
Yep.
And he initially looked at restoring the barn, but as Rick has pointed out, structurally, the fact that it's in a wetland, that the size and the cost of repurposing the barn to a functional state is impractical. So in the spring of 2014, it became clear to Jim that really relocating the barn off the property was the only viable alternative, which would allow it to be publicly preserved. Because it's sitting on private property, even if it was preserved, nobody's gonna have access to it except the owner, so it really, doesn't really serve any public purpose in that way, but to demolish it. So, back in June of 2014, I had met Rick at the Concom meeting about the culvert going under 97 that's finally started to work. And we had talked about the barn that night. And in June 2014, I contacted Rick about his interest in the barn. We subsequently had conversations between Rick and Ed and I, leading to Jim offering to gift the barn to the Georgetown Historical Society if they could find a way, if they were willing to take it. Over the course of the summer, we had several discussions, and in September 2014, I met with Rick, Ed, and Aaron Sturgis at the barn for the purpose of Aaron, looking at the barn, seeing how it was structurally sound, and coming up with a cost estimate to disassemble and reconstruct the barn off-site. In October of that year, Rick advised me that Aaron had estimated at that time $60,000 to take down and store the barn, and another $100,000 to $125,000 to reconstruct it off-site. We discussed further funding alternatives and possibly finding somebody else willing to take the barn. Those discussions continued through about funding and finding somebody else through the spring of 2015. In January of 2015, Jim and I appeared before the Concom about building a new barn, and the Concom hearing that continued to March, primarily because a lot of the conversation in those meetings was about the barn and relocating it and what to do with it. I know Rick and Ed were there, and they can speak to that. So that we again reiterated to Concom that it was available for free, and that if they could find somebody to take it, I think Camp Dennison was brought up that night by Steve Przymski, the Conservation Commission agent, and several of the members of the Concom, and there was some discussion along those lines. So, since nothing was happening on that front, in April of 2015, Jim offered or listed the barn for free on the Barn Pages Com website, which is a website I had never heard of, but we through one of our contacts learned about it and posted the barn for free. There were several inquiries about it, but at the end of the day, no takers because of the cost of taking it down and relocating it. Also in April 2015, I was contacted by Conservation Commission member Lilibeth Weiss, who had a client that was looking for a barn. And again, on April 28th, I went out there with Ms. Weiss, her client, Aaron Sturgis, and several other people to inspect the barn, and spent again another hour and a half, 2 hours out there going through it, and them soliciting Aaron's opinion. But at the end of the day, Ms. Weiss called me back in May to tell me her client wasn't interested, again, because of the cost. Jim's talked with his business contacts to see if anybody wants to, if they know anyone interested in taking the barn. Rick's has tried to generate interest in people taking the barn. I've personally talked with a local architect and a contractor that I had working on my house, which is an old carriage house in Magnolia, and also happened to be down at the Linfield Historic Society and talked to a member down there to see if they were interested or knew anybody that was interested in taking the barn. And the bottom line is it's not a project that anybody's willing to take on. So since June of last year, Jim's made, quoting the bylaw, a continuing bona fide and reasonable effort to locate a purchaser to preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the subject building, and that effort has been unsuccessful. That's twice as long a period as the bylaw requires. I think Jim has been very interested in helping the town do something with this. He's done, complied, I think, with both the letter and the intent of the bylaw, and I think the commission at this point should notify the building inspector that the requirement has been satisfied and that he may issue the demolition permit. I've attached to the my memo that I presented a partial list of the people that have been contacted since June of 2014, and several of them have been contacted by Rick. I think Rick mentioned a couple other people that they contacted tonight, Sturbridge Village and Mass Historic Commission, but we've had people like Mark Poirier from Longleaf Lumber, who came in from the website to look at it just for purely a lumber period perspective, and had no interest in it. We contacted the Tubbsfield Fair Agricultural Society. We've talked to a number of contractors and architects to put the word out there to see if they could find anybody that was interested. And, you know, there's just no takers. Yeah. I've also, you know, attached a list of the emails between Rick and I, because they reference a number of the people that he contacted and talked to. And I think as much as it would be great if the barn could be preserved, I don't think, as Jim said, it's you know, even if you gave a 6-month delay, you know, it's really not significant enough time to do anything here. And yeah, the new barn's going up because Concom has to move it further over, and it's not on the same footprint. But at some point, you know, it's what, about 10 feet, I think, apart, separation between the new barn and the old barn. And I think as much as I'd like to keep, you know, have it preserved, it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And really have done a pretty exhaustive search of finding some taker for it over the past year. And again, that's more than the bylaw requires. So
Now, Rick and I have been chatting over the last couple of days and trying to figure out, not waiting the full 6 months, but giving us a few weeks, maybe, Rick. That seems to be
the
can we
main
look
question
any
I
further?
have is nobody wants to bother going for CPC funds, which could be initiated. That's a death sentence for this building, and it's one of the more significant ones in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It's threatened.
I don't think it's a matter of not wanting to go for CPA funds, but it will be voted on in May at the town meeting.
Yeah,
That would be beyond
nobody
6 months.
initiated this last year because I was tied up in another project that was competing for the CPA funds, and that project ended up not using them.
Because if I may, we had talked last November, December
Yeah.
about going ahead and asking for CPA funds through the town, so it would have been in the Springtown meeting of 2014.
Right.
But again, that just didn't go ahead.
My main concern, if this building is gonna be demolished, would be that we get time to get into the building and sufficient time to salvage some of the relics that are relevant to the history
Would
of
Aaron
the
Sturgis
building.
need access to some
Well,
of these?
I was wondering also if maybe Aaron Sturgis could be demolition expert to come in and take it apart, because if you drive a bulldozer over this, nothing's gonna be salvaged.
No, that's gone.
But if you're in the recycling business, it would be nice to be able to at least recycle some of it. And maybe Aaron Sturgis would be interested in giving
Some
him
of
a
the
decent
heavy
price
structural
for
members or
taking it
something.
down and
Yeah.
taking stuff away. If he isn't, who's gonna demolish it? I mean, you can drive a bulldozer over it and that's the easy way,
Well,
but
everything's gone then.
yeah, then you lose everything. My point is that there are things in the building that probably should be salvaged, at least for possible exhibit. Maybe not in this barn, but in some other future barn
You're
someday.
talking about the hook and
I like to think in
storing
terms
things
of
in
hundreds
press.
of years. This barn's been here 250 years. With due respect to you, you've been here maybe 2 or 3, 5. I don't know. The point being that this is a significant building. It's nothing against you.
I've actually been here for 60 years.
Wow, okay. But anyway, the main point being that it's a building worth preserving. If we can't, it deserves documentation. And I've done the best I could
Yeah, both
for
of us
nothing,
have.
volunteering and
We-
making quick sketches, but they're not the way it should be documented.
And you know, excuse me, I would point out,
Yeah.
you know, Jim has a bachelor's and a master's in history.
Yeah.
So he's, you know, very sensitive to these issues.
Well,
know
I think it's
you
great.
may be a newcomer to Georgetown, but I
Yeah.
think in terms of having
Yeah.
a sense of
Right.
New England
Yeah,
history,
right.
I think he said.
Well,
we'll
I think
call
we're
for it.
all agreed it's significant, and the thing is, if we can document it a little better, I've done the best I can, it's a lot of documentation.
Let's, some
It
of
would be
our
nice to
members,
document.
make some comments if they wish on this, Rick, so the rest
Yeah.
of the board members. What's the feeling between you folks, or Joe Knapp, you've been around for a long time dealing historically with the stuff in town?
Yeah, in listening to the facts, I mean, it's obvious that it's a tough situation that
Oh,
we
it
will
is.
never resolve financially, I don't think, in time for significant
The
removal of
Shirley
it. But
Eustace House found $400,000
Yeah.
to build the coach house to hold Lafayette's coach, and they're in
Right.
Roxbury. And they did a better job than we can do in Georgetown.
our
I don't
our
know
funds,
why, but they managed.
CPA funds are so tight now that,
Yeah,
and getting
That's the
tighter,
problem.
I find it
yeah.
difficult to
The state
realize
will
that we
be
might get
giving
it.
you
So
less in the years ahead, I'm sure of
Even
that.
if we were willing to take the delay of how long it takes to get it. So I kind of agree with the consensus here seems to be that the best thing to do would be to preserve
Dismantle
parts
And,
as best you can.
and save the
Right.
pieces if you can,
Right.
whatever.
But would that need funding? That would need funding itself.
Yeah, I
So
would.
someone's gonna come up with those funds. That's like what?
I think to ask Aaron Sturgis if he's interested in the pieces and doing it,
Yeah.
and what would it
Well,
be his
he
best price.
can
gave us
profit
a-
from the pieces himself
Yeah.
when he does his restoration
Yeah.
projects, right?
I think he could probably use the materials,
Yeah.
I assume. I don't know, maybe.
So that would be the only money he'd ask? You think?
I'm
Yeah.
sure he'd ask
I
for
mean, he
more
could
than
use-
that. I
Yeah.
You know,
guess.
just
Are you talking
timbers-
10K,
Well,
20K?
you're gonna pay somebody, probably your own guys, to demolish it, right?
We've actually had
So you
people,
might have a budget.
we've actually had people come in to see if they wanted
Yeah.
pieces of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
nobody wants.
again, it's been a futile attempt each
yeah,
time.
yeah.
But
I,
we're-
I haven't looked for a full-size 6x6, so every place is still in my carriage house, I didn't find one long enough, but.
Yeah.
So
But a fellow who does this for a living and takes apart barns and reconstructs them, I'm sure he can probably find parts and
We
pieces
can
that
ask
he could
Aaron if he's
store.
interested, but that would be my last resort.
Yeah, I think,
It's a
you know,
worth a
maybe,
call.
maybe a phone call, but, you know,
Yeah.
Aaron's been there
Several
twice.
Yeah, a
times.
couple times.
And he's very familiar with it and knows what's involved in it.
It's a terrific
And-
building.
And
He's-
he's never said, yeah, I'll take it, you know, if nobody
Yeah.
else.
Well, we
wants it.
haven't asked him, you know, we asked
Well,
him, could
yeah,
it
we-
could be
we've had the
dismantled and rebuilt somewhere else? But maybe, he might be, if you want it,
Pieces. I'm just saying, if he's gonna disassemble it, he might be able to use the pieces, some of them,
yeah, exactly.
without bulldozing it. In other words, recycling pieces. I've done that with a lot of pieces of barns.
He didn't
Would
jump
you,
into.
would you mind giving him a call, Rick? We work closely
Yeah,
with
but I
the
mean,
guy.
it's their barn.
I'd give him a call.
Would you?
I've got his number, yeah. And I
And
think
then
I think as far as like this, the storing things in the press,
Yeah, the things
you know, if you wanna take-
inside
if you wanna
there,
take those things.
some of those machinery, I mean, I can put them in my barn. I don't have room, but I'll make room. The thing is, some of it is worth preserving. I mean, I'd like to study that press and whatever else it
Yeah.
is.
Or maybe the Historical Society Museum may have.
Yeah.
If they
room for
eventually
some
have a
later.
barn, they might want it.
Some of the timbers are enormous. I mean,
Yeah, I
they're,
know.
you know,
Yeah.
2 foot across, a foot and a half deep. I mean, they're just
And
pieces
we
that you
had
don't
people
find
come in that
nowadays.
we thought for sure would at least
Yeah.
want that,
But they don't.
and they don't. I mean,
Well,
it's-
they've got mortises in them and they're,
Yeah, I
mean,
realize.
It's
that.
disappointing
Yeah.
when you get your hopes up that somebody would be interested.
Yeah,
in it.
exactly.
yeah,
No, you're right.
Yeah, and you give it away free and still.
yeah,
So all these arguments are great, but
yeah.
it's offered for free and nobody is taking advantage of
Well,
that.
we'll ask Aaron if he wants anything for free, pieces.
I can,
If he
I've
doesn't,
used,
then-
I've dealt with Aaron
That's a
when we
good
did the
sign that it's
Romney
worthless if the guy
restoration
from Maine
project.
doesn't want it.
I feel like giving him a buzz and see what he thinks.
Free's not free when you have to pay to
Yeah,
take it
yeah.
down and move it.
Yeah, exactly.
Big bucks. No, it's not a trivial job.
Right, because of the size of the timbers,
Yeah.
the weight of the
Yeah,
timbers.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
not
have
easy
we
to-
made any attempt to go to the media, newspapers, even TV stations, to
You might be able to
Yeah, let's
see
advertise
if we
it.
can,
Let me call
It's
Aaron,
interesting
that's
history.
a start. I think I've dealt with this guy before and he's done stuff for us over in Raleigh and I think if we can convince him if he can use some of the pieces and not charge a fee to do it, if he can reuse it on some of his projects, then that's
Well,
fine.
you must have allowed something for the demolition, so maybe you can offer him whatever you allowed for the demolition and see if he'll do it,
That's not gonna
to
happen.
get the pieces. No?
if he wants it, it's gonna be his responsibility, because my process of demolishing the building and his process,
Yeah,
Are
quite
two
different.
different ones,
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah,
figured.
but you
I
don't
think
wanna
you've got
either
the
wait for the
chipper-
6 months, and I don't wanna hold you up
I
for
mean,
6 months
believe me,
either.
I'm not trying to set up roadblocks for
Yeah.
the project, but we've actually tried more than
I
I've
know you
ever
have.
tried on any other project
Yeah.
to get something accomplished.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And at the assistance of Brian, we kept trying, even when we were
Yeah.
refused, we kept trying.
I know, it's pretty sad because the Georgetown sawmill was moved to Dearborn, Michigan, to Henry Ford's Dearborn, Michigan. They have a sawmill from Georgetown.
I would have loved to have had the building
Yeah.
relocated to the center of town and be able to tell people that was
Sure,
once on our property.
sure,
but,
yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's feasible.
We
That's-
started too late because the CPA funding last year was robbed by some
yeah.
other projects.
Well,
And,
we do have
it's
AstroTurf
just,
now, and the high school that we're gonna be paying for many, many
And the
years,
windows for town hall,
1.5 million or something.
And the windows for town hall, right?
Yeah, that's a
Are they
big
gonna do
one.
them?
So what can our action, what do we need to do tonight
Well,
to satisfy what the purpose of
I
this
think,
meeting is?
I do wanna call Aaron to see if he can do something, and then it's a matter of letting these folks know, and if it's a week or two to do that, give us a couple of weeks to
So is
bring the
that,
pieces together, and if we can't, then I think we
so we're
cut
not taking,
short the 6-month delay, and we'll talk to the building inspector, and
The bylaw does require you to make a vote tonight,
tonight, that's
whether
what,
it's preferable to preserve or not.
well, I think it should be in the category of preferably preserved, you know.
it's
At any-
historically significant, that's no question
Yeah.
about it.
At any time within that 6 months, this board can vote again to lift that, and as soon as that's done, I would be authorized to issue the demolition permit.
Okay,
So, but I
That
can't.
sounds like the way to do it.
Well, if I may, actually, you can find that it's preferably preserved, which is, certainly it is, I don't think anybody questions that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the provision in 44
I read it, it's
9H,
right here.
yeah,
I got it highlighted.
says that, Jim's made for more than a year an effort to find a
Yeah.
buyer or whatever. And I think based on that the board would find this preferably preserved, but also find under section 9 that notwithstanding that, the building inspector can issue the demolition
Section
permit.
H1 and 2 indicate the same situation. The commission is satisfied that at least 6 months of the owner has made continuing bona fide reasonable efforts to locate a purchaser to preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the subject building, and that's efforts have been unsuccessful, and we've done the same thing on our end by contacting everyone that we're aware of, and
So it's-
so give us a few weeks to try one last shot at it, and then we'll, I'm all for saying that it should be preferably preserved, but that, if we can't do anything in 2 weeks, then, we'll go to the building inspector and, we'll write a letter and tell him to go ahead and not take the 6
2 weeks
months.
or
Well,
a month, what do you think, is
if
it
I
in the
might-
way,
if-
is a month too long?
If I might, I think what John is saying, I agree with, is you have to vote tonight
Yeah, we do have
on
to
both, on
vote.
both points.
We have to vote on only one point, whether it should be or should not be preferably preserved.
Now, the second point, if I may, is that under 44.9, that in spite of that,
Yeah.
since Jim has met the requirements of 44.9H2, as that you just read, then these.
Well, we would like to take it a step further in terms of the historical commission and give us a matter of days. so
Well,
we
I
can-
think Jim will give you a matter of days and give you a couple of weeks
Yeah.
before anything happens. But I think under the bylaw,
Yeah,
that you have to, I think everybody's in agreement that Jim's met that requirement of trying to sell it.
oh yeah, I agree, we both
So,
have.
so that you have to vote both points, that A is preferably preserved, that's hard to say.
Yeah,
But that Jim's made the effort,
We-
under
yeah.
the bylaw, and therefore instruct the building inspector not
No.
to delay the demolition
Right.
permit.
Right,
well,
That's
what I
right.
wanna do is give us a couple of weeks.
We will,
like-
but that's what you gotta vote tonight.
he says,
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
going to vote tonight. We
Okay.
haven't- We're not there yet.
so you gotta have a motion like what he said
That's correct.
to vote on, and you still get
Do
the
you wanna
2
make
weeks.
the motion, Joe, or one of the other members?
It's just
And do you feel 2 weeks is adequate, because sometimes it takes, people are away on vacation, and it takes a while for
Yeah, I
them
was
to get
gonna
back to
say
you?
a month would be more realistic.
What's reasonable
but
for him,
It's
though?
not in the way of the construction,
We're not
is it
gonna
too
hold
much
you
of
up
a
for
hassle?
6 months.
We're not gonna hold you up for
It isn't, but, the contractor's out there now.
Sure.
And if you have to, wait a month, hopefully it's going to be completed within the month. And, framing's, I think, starting next week.
We have the equipment on site right
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
and every day that he has completed it, that he's not using it, is going to be costly.
Yeah.
So I'll call Aaron tomorrow and have a talk with
Well,
him.
let me speak with Aaron, because I've dealt with him, and Rick has as well. We've dealt with him over the
And could we
years.
Right,
begin
but
know what he's
salvage of
looking
some
for.
of that stuff in there, or what? How do
Yeah,
you wanna do that?
the press and those hooks that you wanna
We need some sort of,
take out. Hold harmless.
disclaimer, yeah.
Yeah, just hold harmless for what was going on there, just to pull
Something
things
to
out.
skirt or something.
Yeah, so because we've got,
Yeah.
the land's kinda torn up now with the,
Right.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the barn going
And
up.
once the new structure's put up, would it inhibit taking it down? It would, right?
No,
'Cause
it's
you're getting
not that
close.
Well, it's,
One side would be
Inhibited.
It
inhibited.
would have been easier to take
Yeah.
it down.
Remove it
first.
first, yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me
So
put
that
it
would
this
drive-
way, we
drive it.
won't wait the 6 months, we won't wait the 5 months, but give us a month, I'd say is not excessive in order for us to chase things down.
Again, with due respect, I think what you have to vote on is whether or not he's met the requirement.
Yes, I
that
think he has.
to authorize the demolition permit to be issued.
It
He'll give.
cannot issue the demolition permit until we give them the
Right.
go-ahead and said, we tried our best,
No.
you've tried your
No,
best.
it just says that Jim tried his best, which I think we've established tonight.
No,
That's, with due respect, that's what the bylaw says.
Right.
the commission
Kind
is
of
satisfied that there is no reasonable likelihood that either the owner, read item 1 under H.
Yeah, but if then
The
it's,
owner or some other person or group is willing to purchase, preserve, rehabilitate, or restore such building.
and then.
That's what we've done.
No, and then it says or.
Yeah,
Or,
The commission is satisfied that for at least 6 months, the owner has made continuing bona fide reasonable efforts to locate a purchaser.
so are we satisfied that he did that? It sounds like we have to be, because he did.
well,
That's the only
we've
issue.
got a piece of paper that says he's done it. I just,
Yeah, right.
I don't,
Well, with due respect,
yeah,
we contacted you and Rick a year ago,
I know.
and we've been working with you guys for a year.
And we've been
And-
on the
and-
phone constantly.
Exactly, and there's no, and that's what,
Well, we're not
If-
asking for 6 months, we're asking for 1 month.
1
what I'm
month.
saying is that
Yeah.
we'll give you time to get the material out, the press and that sort of thing. Whoever wants to call Aaron Sturgis can call Aaron Sturgis. I think Rick's
Yeah.
point that it should come from the owner rather than,
Yeah.
but whoever wants to call him, but I'm gonna call him tomorrow too and see if he
I will
wants.
call as well.
And, but I think on what's been presented to you this evening, the vote has to be that you prefer that it be preferably preserved, but because Jim's met the requirements of 44-9,
No,
then
I don't want the building permit to be issued tomorrow morning.
I
is
know you
what
don't
I'm
want to.
saying.
I know you don't want to, but, and it won't, because you've gotta write something to the building inspector,
Yeah.
and if it takes you a week to write it, I mean,
No.
that takes you however long it takes you to write it.
We're asking
General
for-
law allows me 30 days to issue a permit.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
So-
that's
so-
the month, okay.
so, well, what I'm telling you is tonight you have to take a vote,
I will.
and you can't
will.
bifurcate the vote, you can't split it in 2 parts.
We are gonna take the
Well, then
vote.
it's up to the
Let it
building
be-
inspector, his discretion.
We're,
when he
we're not
issues
gonna
it.
vote for the demo delay, that's what, basically.
No, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what
that's
you're
the
saying.
bottom
The delay has been
Right.
done, I mean, I
Right.
have to admit
That's a
that,
done-
it's
that's a
sad
goner.
but true. I mean,
Put that in
If I
a
could've done
motion, or do
something,
you
I
want me to
would've.
put it in a motion, or what? Guys?
Should have captured his
Anyone else
words.
do it? Why don't you-
the circumstances conspired against it.
We'll say that, okay, I'll put this in a form of a motion, and that the 6-month delay is not necessary and not possible due to the research that all of us have spent, both the historical commission and the owner.
Right.
They've gone above and beyond, but we need 1 month according to the building inspector, so that'll be the month that we're talking about then. Correct?
You see hardship in
I-
that?
I want 30 days.
He has 30 days to
He
issue
has
it.
discretion.
Legally,
I have
it is
30 days.
discretion.
Okay.
But you can sign off on it before that.
Yeah, you know, if 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, and we're not able to do anything, or I can't talk to it, or Aaron doesn't wanna come up and do it, then what I prefer doing is,
No.
as you mentioned, I don't want the bulldozers to come in and wipe out everything that's there.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to document it a little more, at least,
Yeah.
I mean, before it's gone.
I'm just wondering what you expect to accomplish in that time period. If someone says that there's still a possibility of something happening, what
No, I've
what
got,
happens
no,
to
it's
that?
gotta be wrapped up within.
Yeah, there's
I'm not
never
wrapped
been
up, I don't wanna-
a publicity for this thing.
It would have to be a definitive plan to get it out of his way,
Well, let's say.
whatever happens.
Let's,
That's
let's,
what
let's say, a maximum of, 1 month,
Okay, if I might,
Yeah, up to 1 month.
if
up
I-
to 1 month.
Well, wait, you can't vote that.
Yeah,
You have, under the bylaw,
yeah,
you vote tonight, you have 5 days to notify the building inspector
Yeah.
under the bylaw
yeah,
that the demolition permit can't be delayed,
that's correct.
and then it's within the building inspector's discretion when he decides to issue it.
Yeah.
Within 30 days.
Within,
30 days.
that's the 30-day period I'm looking for.
But you can't have your vote any time period to delay it, that's only, you've gotta write the building inspector within 5 days. from
He's
the
good
vote
at
to
reading the
vote.
fine print.
That's what I get paid
That's
for.
why he's a lawyer.
So,
And-
He's not
and-
just here for his looks, Ed.
And for the
That's
record,
for- that's for
15
sure.
15 years of that was being town council in two places, so.
We had nobody recording that motion.
yeah, let's make a motion to, that's true, that's gotta be referred to. You take a couple notes, Joe?
Well, try to.
The regular secretary that we had is not able to make the meeting tonight.
Okay,
So the motion should read,
he has the right words for it, technically,
I'm working on it.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see, that would be, if he were to write it up in accordance with the bylaw and give it to us and we'll chew on it. I'd rather, and we have the building inspector here, he knows it leftward, forward and back
It
too.
says he
Oh.
has met the requirements of section.
Yeah, right, 40, whatever it is,
44.9.
yeah. So given that, the-
we're saying it should be we should vote that it be preferably preserved.
Yeah.
That's one thing, we're not throwing
but
history out.
according
But-
to the bylaw, the
Yeah.
builder has obviously satisfied
He has.
the conditions that that statement is made for.
But we wanna carry that,
Well, that's gonna be that's kind of a gentleman's agreement here. It's given the time of the building inspector to respond, the 30 days, right?
Yeah, well, that's
There's
the
no,
30
that's
day-
not part of the motion.
no.
That's what he's saying. You can't make that,
But can I,
I think the applicant has shown
yeah,
his,
due diligence,
his
due
good,
diligence.
good faith too
Yeah.
to the town.
Right.
He's-
Right.
now if we get,
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Let's say in those 30 days, you actually find somebody who is willing and able and financially able to take the barn, but they can't get it down in that 30 days. Would the owner be willing to extend that time if we had a solid offer to remove it?
Now you're asking.
that's a good question.
Yeah, because how long would it take to take it down piece by piece?
I saw one
Probably a week or
just recently in Tingsboro. It took him about 2 weeks.
2
Yeah, a
weeks.
week or
And
two.
it was bigger structure than
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
See, I would think that the 1 month is it. If we
It's
can't do it in 1 month, then forget it.
right.
The
Well, let's
5 months.
say in week 3, somebody says, I want it, I've got the money for it, but
So
I
they-
can't get it down that quickly.
That would be close,
Yeah.
but
Can we get, is the owner willing to give an extension if we have a solid yes with financial backing?
I'd like to get the vote done tonight.
I'm just.
And I would never
Yeah.
refuse anybody
Read
that had some
okay,
sort
read
of
it and
Yeah.
then we'll vote on it.
concrete
Yeah,
agreement.
I mean, I'm talking, we need extension maybe
He
for a
understands
week
the
or
law a
two,
lot
whatever
better
the
now.
person would need.
And then the building inspector will hear it.
Yeah,
One other mention I'd like to make about Aaron Sturgis, the reason I'd say call him is that there are weird joints and things in this building that don't exist anywhere else. I think he might like to document them. He's good at sketching joinery. He may want to make a record of some of the joinery in this building, because it is pretty unique.
The only thing I want added to this is I want to slip in this 30-day thing and not
I don't think
2
you
weeks,
can.
4 days from now, you guys say, well, too bad, I got the bulldozer, now I'm gonna take it down.
Can't
No,
do that.
Can't do that. You,
I can't issue, I
He's
won't
the-
issue the permit,
Okay,
and
Bless you. It's still within the town's authority.
yeah, I realize that.
Yeah.
And he says he has 30 days in order to do that, so I'm satisfied with the 30 days.
It's a trust, right?
That's- Okay, the way it reads then, I move that the commission determine that the building is preferably preserved. That's an agreement, and do the other members agree to that?
Yeah.
But that the owner has satisfied the requirements of section 44-9H2.
What was the transitional word there? Was it or but?
I'm sorry.
Or,
But, we moved that it's,
Preserved,
Preferably
but that,
Voted on the motion.
but, what was the transitional word? I missed
but that the owner
Okay.
was satisfied, has satisfied
Okay.
the requirements of
That's
this
what I was looking
particular
for.
section,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what we agreed to.
And then the building inspector has 30 days in which to,
He has to react according to the bylaw, period.
Yeah.
Whatever that
He
is.
has up to 30 days to issue.
Okay, once you're ready, you need a second to that,
yeah.
and then a vote, and then you can discuss the building inspector.
Can I get that in here now?
No,
Oh, wait.
you can't get in there.
I don't think there's
it's not
time
part of the
limit.
bylaw,
Is
it's
that
part
part
of
of
Mass
bylaw?
General Law.
Okay, so that'll
Yeah.
be.
You're
Do
gonna
I have
tri-
a second to this motion that we just made?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, all in favor, please raise your hands. Okay.
To pass, because I
yeah,
haven't been voted
Okay,
yet.
we needed 3, so that's the 4. Okay,
Not official
so
yet.
that's, you win, unanimous,
I can
unanimous.
raise my- I can barely raise
And you didn't trip over anything down at the barn, did you, for that?
mine. I'd love to see the barn.
Yeah, you saw the pictures,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic building.
When will the structures,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The piece
when
of
will the
the town
structures start
system.
going up, do you know?
So I will write you
His is
tomorrow.
already
with
No,
starts
you're not gonna
effects
write
going
it
up.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
5 days.
Well, I don't
5
know,
days.
the
oh,
actual.
so
days,
do you have
yeah.
30 days
Foundation's
after
Be
we
in a
sign?
hurry.
After
Yeah.
that?
Once
Mr. Chairman, or acting
once
chair?
it's complete.
Wait,
Wait 5
Okay.
days.
Well, I know that, 5 days.
Just as a matter,
I'll
just as
get
a matter
it.
of procedure.
Yeah.
If it's Aaron or Rick or you or whoever, wants to or needs to come on the property to document, because there's construction going on now,
Yeah.
I will need whoever's coming on to let me know and to sign a release,
Yeah.
you know, so that if they get injured on the site or
Well,
whatever.
that's it, I'm
Yeah,
not
can we
coming.
do that on email or what?
We can do that as long as I get a signed one fax or
Well,
email
let's-
back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get Aaron on board if he wants to hear
Yeah, if we
or
can get him
decide
there
what he
too.
wants.
But I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
clearly, you know, I don't know who's gonna, coordinate, you know, getting the, like the press pieces and that sort of thing.
It's
Do you have
more
any-
than a
do you have
one-man
any other
job, so I'll
comments?
talk to Aaron, see if we
Clear.
can get him interested.
Okay, let's do
Yeah.
that.
You have other comments, Mr. Inspector? No? Okay,
Chris,
well,
anything else? Sounds like we'll get a month anyway, before,
Too
the
bad.
show's over and
I wouldn't
we can
count
act
more
on
than
that.
2 weeks.
Thank you for
Okay,
being
thank you.
here, gentlemen, and thank you for putting the effort you have into.
So what kind of horses are we gonna have?
Too bad.